Holding is very clearly defined, as is face masking. So when they both happen on the same play, one of the two should be called. So we're here with your Super Bowl recap sponsored by Prips. The Buford Sports Network is going to be diving into all things Super Bowl. And Dirk, I have a pop quiz for you. In the rule book, when a defensive end who is rushing towards the quarterback is grabbed by the face mask by an offensive tackle, impeding him from reaching the quarterback, is that or is that not two violations of the NFL rulebook in both holding and face mask? And is the Super Bowl not the most watched game? I believe it was around 125 million viewers. Everyone could see this happen, except apparently for several officials on the field who managed to swallow their whistles on almost every single hold that took place in the fourth quarter and overtime, and there was a preponderance of them. Dirk, what on earth happened at the end of the Super Bowl? What was going on out there? It goes like Vince Lombardi back. What the hell's going on out here?
Mike, I think what happened is that they watched our video last week about how they could improve the halftime show and decided, why wait for the halftime show? Let's just implement it now into the fourth quarter. It's the Royal Rumble.
Let's do it live.
We're doing it live, Bill O'Reilly style. No, but seriously, I'm with you. I do think that the NFL, if there is a legitimate criticism, it is that they do not call games anywhere close in postseason play than they do in regular season. Now look, this happens year over year, and Mike, you're going to tell me it was more egregious this year than other years, and I can hear you, and I'll hear you, and I know I'm hearing the Denver Broncos fan in you come out, but it seems like you get to the NFC, AFC championship round, and the refs no longer call anything that is not blatantly obvious. Let's see. First, what was it? The only penalties that I can even remember from that game were like offsides. Do you know what I'm saying? Or like illegal procedure or something like that, you know? I think the refs just don't call anything. And that's where, remember when we talked last week why I thought that they had the experience? That's the experience factor to me of being in like late round playoff games and in the Super Bowl, is that you just have the experience that you know you can go out there and just completely manhandle a person. You could do a suplex, you could do a power bomb, hell, you could probably even do a Goldberg jackhammer and you're not going to get called for holding.
That's the thing, though, is that in previous Super Bowls, people do get called for holding at least a couple of times when it's ongoing throughout the entire game. And my beef with it, Dirk, is that there were so many egregious holds on Nick Bosa on key downs, all right? Like, we go through Kansas City's game-tying drive in fourth quarter, and then we go through the overtime drive. There are two absolutely egregious holds on Nick Bosa on the game-tying drive, both of which would have put the Chiefs in 3rd and 15 plus. And then we go to the game-winning drive in overtime, and Fred Warner gets tackled from behind while he's blitzing the quarterback. Here's my problem with this, Dirk. There is a reason that the offensive tackle and the edge rusher are the second and third highest paid players in football, and it's because the edge rusher has the capacity to dramatically affect the outcome of a game. We saw it happen with Von Miller in Super Bowl 50. He completely wrecked the Carolina Panthers in that Super Bowl. Nick Bosa was on course to wreck this game. I mean, the 49ers defense had them in the game, and Bosa, here's the deal. Even if he doesn't sack Mahomes, if you call the holds, it means that the tackles no longer can get away with it, and it makes it that much more challenging. And is Mahomes going to be that comfortable in the pocket if he has an actual edge rusher to touch him? I mean, how many times did Mahomes even hit the turf on Sunday? It barely happened. And, you know, it just, in three, and I will say this, I'm not a conspiracy theorist on this stuff, but it does bother me a little that in 3 Super Bowl victories, Mahomes and the Chiefs have been called for 0 offensive holding penalties on the offensive line. So in those 3 victories, the one Super Bowl loss he has, the Buccaneers, got pressure on him and he didn't look very good. So that's just where I'm coming from.
And it's particularly bad when the Chiefs have an offensive lineman that has more penalties called against him than any other player in the NFL. Now, I guess my question back to you, Mike, is how much do you think that this is played in because of the amount of poor calls that were called against players over the course of the season? We had some particularly egregious no calls, one of which actually was a Kansas City game, and it was that same reffing crew week over week that was just blowing calls in really poor situations. How much do you think that played into we're just not going to have game deciding penalties being called in these late round games? How much do you think that was an emphasis because of how poor the officiating was earlier this year?
Where I come from on this, and I think it is a valid point. I'm not just trying to pad my own argument. I think it is valid. There are certain times where, say, a catch rule, which also came up, George Kittle, had his catch rule moment, and then you've got moments like a defensive pass interference or something. They're called ticky-tack. Some of these calls are subjective calls, right? Like, there is some subjectivity towards what could or could not be called. When it comes to what was happening with the holds, those are objectively holds that were so blatant that you can't miss those calls. Like, it just completely affects the outcome of the game because you are allowing a clear infraction on a huge part of what, defensive football is predicated on, pressuring the quarterback. If your offensive tackles are holding the whole game and the referees aren't calling it, they're not going to get pressure on the quarterback. The quarterback is going to have a much easier job. That is where my beef lies with this. And once again, I just feel like, it is problematic on the NFL's end that they did not do a very good job of calling this. I'm not saying it's the Taylor Swift conspiracy, the refs conspired to help the Chiefs win, but San Francisco fans do actually have legitimate beef on this, and it's not like it came down to one play. You can circle 4, 5, 6 different times this happened on key plays in the game. Big problem and a big black eye on the course of this Super Bowl. Not going to be highly remembered in my mind.
Mike, here's the problem. It's going to be highly remembered simply because it is one of the few overtime Super Bowls there was. Two questions. And I'll finalize this out. I'm not so concerned about, when we're talking about officiating and stuff like that, I'm not so concerned about, the new overtime rules and some of these other things. But how pissed is Dez Bryant right now? I mean, Jusic had that catch rule thing right on the sideline there, where he had 2 feet. He gets the ball down. Now, clearly, you and I say it's a catch.
But Jusic,
yeah. But how pissed do you think Dez Bryant is? Just being like, bro, I had even clearer catch than that.
Right. See, I think that the problem was that the rule changed after the Dez Bryant rule came into play, for one. But again, catches always have been subjective, and that rule has not been clearly defined. Holding is very clearly defined, as is face masking. So when they both happen on the same play, one of the two should be called. And especially when it's the 49ers' best edge rusher coming with pressure.
Hey, man, you know what? I think bear hugs are just allowed in the Super Bowl.
You're going to find no shortage. Kids, you can find all sorts of weird stuff on Twitter. Don't go digging around too much on there. But if you do want to find some montages of holding penalties in the Super Bowl, there are a lot of them on Twitter right now.
One last thing on just rules and officiating and stuff like that. I know there's the rule change for overtime. Okay, so both teams get the ball, right? And there's a little bit of controversy, I guess, about how apparently some 49ers players didn't know this. But what kept going through my mind is, so maybe I just don't know this, but if both teams get at least one possession, what happens with the clock? I was kind of thinking about this, and it never really became an issue. But if the time runs out, does your possession run out at that point, or how does that mix in?
You probably have to go pretty deep into the overtime rule book at that point. But I was kind of the same thing. I was like, why do we have a clock at this point? Just get rid of the clock.
That would be the most classic Super Bowl ever if they tied. It's like, oh no, it's just a tie now.
Yes, let's just start it over. Yeah, we're gonna kick it off next Sunday. This Super Bowl was crap, and don't go back and rewatch it, or else you're gonna be very angry with all the missed holding calls.